It's coming. There's no escape. On Halloween, the veil between this world and the next will lift. And then, all hell breaks loose. People have been scaring each other for as long as there's been a Halloween. But how long is that? Where does it come from? And why do we put on disguises and carve jack-o'-lanterns? To indulge our darkest fears? Unlocking the secrets of Halloween means discovering how it all began, thousands of years ago. So lock the doors, dim the lights, and don't be scared as we dig up the real story of Halloween. How can you describe Halloween without sounding insane? Masked children come to our doors and threaten us. In return, we give them candy. But why? Why do we carve faces into fruit, then light candles inside them? And why do we adorn our homes with coffins and tombstones? The truth is, we take great pleasure in scaring ourselves to death.
Halloween is about being someone else. It's about getting outside your own skin. And I think we tolerate it because we know it's one night.
This impulse to confront our fears of life and of death and make sport of them, it's ancient. And so are our treasured Halloween traditions. When did Halloween begin?
And its ancient origins go back to the old Celtic calendar. And the old Celtic tribes divided the year between a light half and a dark half. And Samhain, their ancient holiday, was a precursor to our Halloween. It was the beginning of the dark half.
Thousands of years ago, the Celts, one of Europe's early tribes, celebrated their Samhain harvest festival with bonfires on the night of October 31st to welcome their new year. For ancient peoples, harvest was a matter of life and death. If crops failed, people starved. Death was always close.
It was a bit of a warning. You know, it's going to get cold and dark. Gather together, come home, and don't send anybody out alone in the dark.
But the Celts believed there was even more to Samhain.
What marked Samhain and this transition from light to dark was that time and space became permeable, flexible. And so that spirits, not only of the dead, but of the past or of other realities, could sort of wander into our reality. And humans could wander out and get lost in the other world as well.
The veil between life and death was at its thinnest, and the living and the dead could commingle. And that's at the root of all the Halloween celebrations.
Stories persist of people on Samhain night getting trapped in the other world, and of the dead appearing among the living. But the truth is, we know precious little about Samhain. We can only guess that their bonfires likely drew one familiar Halloween icon, a thing familiar yet frightening to many: the bat.
Before there was electricity, the only way you would have seen a bat would have been by the firelight. And in fact, you probably would have seen it around the fire because bats eat insects, and insects are attracted to the light.
Bats come out at night, and nighttime was scary time. So if bats are the best and baddest part of your Halloween, you might just credit ancient people like the Celts. And they weren't the only ancient culture with creepy traditions. Others also looked to their dead.
Many, many cultures sort of set aside a day or a couple of days to ritually celebrate and recognize the dead. An interesting thing is that you find a lot of them about the same time period. especially in agricultural societies, because if you think about it, spring things come up out of the ground, they're very green, you harvest in the middle of the summer, and towards the fall, and when it gets towards winter, things die.
How did these ancient traditions survive into our modern era? In Western culture, they were preserved by, of all people, Christians. In a bizarre twist of history, as Christianity spread, it adopted and reimagined pagan folkways rather than try to stamp them out. This made it easier to convert pagans. A key pagan festival destined to get a Christian makeover was Lemuria, when celebrants placated the dead, culminating on May 13th.
Of all the different days that they have in the Roman calendar to celebrate the dead, it was the spookiest. So on the Lemuria, what are called the larvae, the ghosts of the departed, would come up and haunt people.
To quell the dead, pagan Romans poured milk onto their graves or offered them little cakes. But the church co-opted Lemuria in 609 AD, turning May 13th into All Saints' Day, a day to honor the most holy of dead Christians.
Setting aside this day was an attempt to Christianize this very pagan festival, and yet at the same time what it did was it kept a lot of the same themes going.
The Christianized version of Lemuria was such a success that church leaders made a decision that eventually gave rise to Halloween. They moved All Saints, or Hallows Day, to November 1st to drain the life out of pagan Samhain. Because Samhain fell on the night of October 31st, before All Hallows Day on November 1st, people started calling Samhain All Hallows Evening, the evening before All Hallows Day. This shortened into All Hallows Even, and finally into Halloween. And then, to be safe, the church went one step further, adding a holiday to honor not just saints, but everyday Christians. November 2nd became All Souls Day, a church-sanctioned holiday to honor the departed.
This is real important for Halloween because this is where Halloween gets its association with dead souls, death, and the supernatural again.
So thank the church for inspiring the creepy essentials of Halloween. But wait, there's more. The church also helped establish the tradition of trick-or-treating, sort of. It all started during the Middle Ages on All Souls Day, when priests told Christians to pray for souls trapped between heaven and hell in a netherworld they called purgatory.
Purgatory was not a pleasant place. It's not hell. It's not as bad as hell is, but it's still probably pretty fiery. Souls are kind of suffering there. Luckily, there is something that you could do. You could offer up prayers for them.
How did souls get out of purgatory? According to the church, if enough prayers were offered, a soul would fly up into heaven. This led to a medieval custom that bears more than a striking resemblance to our modern trick-or-treat. Children would go souling, begging for soul cakes, spiced cakes filled with raisins. In return for these treats, the beggars would offer up prayers for souls trapped in purgatory. While this forerunner to trick-or-treat became a preoccupation for medieval Christians, so did another future essential of Halloween: witches.
It made perfect sense for people in medieval times to believe that there were demons and witches. And if there were demons and witches and they were responsible for bad things in the world, it made sense that you hunt them down and you kill them. That was their worldview.
A witch panic in the 16th century helped establish the look of the character that, for many, epitomizes Halloween. Almost always women, witches were seen as in league with Satan.
They were probably the healers who had cures and folklore and passed down orally through generations. And at some point, that becomes very suspicious.